The second episode of Matrix Mash with me, Emily Moyer, and my good friend Robert Phoenix. Thank you so much for all the awesome comments we got on the last show about Serena Williams, and we're ready to go for round two. Robert, welcome back.
Hey, it's great to be back, Emily, doing this thing. I guess we're going to get into some di-fi today, huh? Some Dianne Feinstein.
Oh, di-fi. I like that. I haven't heard that before.
Yeah,
dude.
That's what they call her back in the Bay Area, di-fi. So we'll get into some of that stuff and see what we can dig out and dig around and how it relates to what's going on with Kavannaugh and Christine Blasey and all that.
The Kavannaugh sense.
The Kavannaugh sense, absolutely.
We have QAnon sense, and now we have Kavannaugh sense. And I coined the QAnon sense, but I have to hat tip to Tabitha Wallace from Watching the Hawks. She had a program about the Kavannaugh sense the other day. And I was like, yeah, that's really good. I like the Kavannaugh sense. You know, when I think about Dianne Feinstein, the two things that keep coming to my mind are Frankenstein and Einstein, right? There are problems with both. And she seems to encapsulate some of each of those problems.
You know, she's no spring chicken either. She was born in 1933.
Yeah.
So what is she? She's, 85? Is that right?
Fucking retire already, dude. Enjoy all that money.
85 years old. 85 years old.
Like, it to me, this is crazy. Like, retire. Go enjoy all the money that you've stolen from the people. Like, what are you still doing?
Yeah, we talked about this. And, we get into the astrological component. Yeah. And right now, she really can't retire because she's kind of at a peak right now, astrologically. We can get into some of that. But, yeah, I've got 3 charts lined up, ready to go. But maybe we should do a little background.
Yeah,
and
please.
Tell people why we're talking about this today.
And why she's so busy for an 85-year-old.
Yeah, so this whole thing came up when this doctor, professor, Christine Blasey Ford, got in touch with her and said that she'd been molested, not raped, by the way. There's no rape here. There's no police report. There's no police record. There's nothing that says that there was any rape. The story goes like this, that she was at an event between 2 prep schools back in Washington, D.C. Her prep school was in Bethesda, Maryland, and Kavanagh's prep school was in Washington, D.C., not very far, actually, from the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. So he went to Georgetown Prep, which is pretty well known back there. And she went to, Holton Arms? Is that anyway, so they had a mixer, and I think this was around 1980. It might have been like maybe just after they were out of high school, very close, right around there. And supposedly, Brett Kavanaugh got in a room with Christine Blasey, and they were doing something. He got on top of her and, started hard kissing her. And this is the story that we're being given by Feinstein and the media. Well, turns out that there's another potential story that could have broken last year, where apparently Blasey had the same complaint that she was ready to lodge against Neil Gorsuch. So this came out on Rush Limbaugh, I think today or yesterday. And what that basically says is that they're all part of the same group.
Yep.
Like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh went to the same high school together. I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
So this is theater from both sides.
Yeah, Kavanaugh's older than Gorsuch by a year. And you really latched onto this when I was talking on my show the other day about how Kavanaugh's mother was a judge. She was a district judge in Maryland, and she actually presided over a number of cases over Ralph Blasey and Ralph Blasey's real estate holdings. And in fact, in one case, she actually had to rule on a foreclosure against Blasey. So there's some really interesting entanglement with the two families from a legal perspective. And then you and I were talking about and how I rolled out all that stuff about Blasey being the banker for the CIA. And then there's this connection with Dr. Frederick Melgus being the great kind of, mind control professor at Stanford, and how Blasey is one of his students. So Frederick Melgus, he actually practices and is a kind of a master of mind control.
And isn't she a professor over a program that would have some of these CIA kind of people, trainees in it? Isn't that what she sort of does at Stanford now?
Absolutely.
She's a professor at Stanford, right? She went there and she's a professor there.
That's right. Yep.
And tell me real quick, what college did Kavannaugh go to?
I believe Kavannaugh was Yale twice.
Okay.
So
all right.
So he went to Yale for undergrad and then Yale for law. And I think Gorsuch went, where did he go? I think he went Columbia, Princeton.
So it's interesting how they have it like lined up so that it could have been launched, this thing with Gorsuch. For some reason, they decided not to at that point, or she wasn't triggered in the appropriate manner or something. Like this to me, like, it is obvious to anyone who's watching that this is theater from one side, and this is my concern with everybody, with everything, is people think, oh, Democrats bad, but the Republicans are good in this case. Nah, I think that there's shit being puppeteered from that side too. Like, I'm really more and more starting to think, I think this in general about everything, but like when you're looking at this case, Kavanaugh's in on this. Like this is part of when you ascend to these levels of power and privilege and all this kind of stuff, public shaming is part of that. You sign up for that. You agree to that. That's, that's sometimes it happens. And I think in a way that you maybe like didn't really expect, or it's a little more humiliating than you thought it was going to be. But this is not being puppeteered only by one side. There is something up top running both sides of this. And this is how the mind control programs work. MK Ultra kind of things, they use their own children in these programs, and it is entirely possible that her entire purpose, that so much of her programming has, stuff set in place to be triggered right now at this time for this reason. Or maybe there's a traumatic thing happens and then you put in codes that can then be triggered at any time later for some specific reason or purpose or whatever. And her purpose may be being revealed right now.
Could be. There's a strong chance that she could be an MK Ultra asset, although she doesn't necessarily conform to sort of the standard model. Like, I don't have a full background on her, but I don't think she had that breakdown just before she was around 28 or 29. She doesn't have any kind of the wild, at times, slightly psychotic or schizophrenic behavior where these parts of the brain are trying to take over at certain points in time.
So then just more in on it herself, you're thinking? I think
she may have some of it. She may have some programming. But is she Kathy O'Brien, where,
right,
you utter a word and all of a sudden she'll do anything that, you want her to do, or, along those lines? I tend to think she's probably more of the daughter of an operative.
Yeah.
And Ralph Blasey has had a very strong connection with the CIA for a number of years. And I cover this on my show, that there was a guy back in, what was it? This was the 80s. And his name was Nicholas Deacon. And Nicholas Deacon was killed by a woman by the name of Lois Lang.
Yeah, yeah.
And Lois Lang was kind of this homeless woman that had been taken in by this Melgus character, the guy who's this professor at Stanford who does all this MK Ultra programming. So he took her in, and then he probably turned her into truly what we're now talking about, an MK Ultra assassin, La Femme Nikit kind of style, right? Mm-hmm. And she got the program, and she went out and she found Deacon, and this Deacon guy was connected to Blasey, and it was all about the money that they were using to funnel through from, the Contras, the sale of the cocaine, and all the stuff that was going on. And then when Reagan got in, he found out about it, and he was like, "Wow, we gotta do something different about this." This is, although it continued to go on for a while after that.
Right.
But what's interesting, here's where there's this fascinating bifurcation, is that the Bushes are standing by Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh,
Mm-hmm.
and the Clintons are not.
This is interesting. So is that what this is really about? Is there a fissure in the Bush-Clinton cabal?
Could be. And the reason why is that there is some deep loyalty to Kavanaugh, because I believe both Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, but certainly Kavanaugh, I'm pretty sure, served under Bush. He was part of the Bush administration.
Yeah.
So there's some ties here. And if indeed there are lines towards money laundering and cocaine black budgets, of course the Bushes are going to be very, very concerned about it. But so would the Clintons, by the way, because they're involved in it too.
You know what's interesting though? It's so funny. I've been having some funny thoughts the last couple of days. And wasn't there just right before this Kavanaugh thing started, wasn't there some reports of planes being sent to Arkansas to collect documents and collect boxes and stuff like that? You know, maybe these things are somehow related.
Yeah, I heard that. I heard a little rumor of that. It wouldn't surprise me.
And then I also had this funny thought, and this is maybe a little bit of an aside, but it's so funny how Bill Clinton is from Hope, Arkansas.
That's right.
And all the stuff with Obama was based on hope and change. And his book was The Audacity of Hope.
Yeah.
Like, is this Matrix? Is this simulation coding? Is there something fritzing here? Like,
could be. I mean, the thing with Clinton, you know, I keyed in on that back in like 2009 when Obama was running. Like, oh, he's from Hope and Change. Oh, wow, this interesting. Yeah, it could be. It absolutely could be. But we're witnessing some very sort of draconian, you know, theater here. I mean, this is real high level Mandarin theater with Illuminati families kind of entangled in trying to either sort out power, protect their power interests that are based on relationships with people that have been in power, i.e. the Bushes. So nothing is as it seems.
No.
With this whole deal, right?
And this has totally captivated everything. Like nobody's paying attention to anything else that's going on. It's totally overshadowing whatever happened with the Russia, Syria, Israel thing the other day. All people talk about all day is this Kavanaugh thing.
Yeah, that's correct. And the Russia, Israel, Syria thing is really wild and bizarre. And there are people in Russia who, just to let people know, if you're not familiar with it, there was a Russian. It essentially was kind of like a large aircraft, kind of doubling as a bomber, sort of intelligence gathering aircraft, flying at a fairly high altitude. And it was shot out of the sky by a Syria S-200 missile system that was given to them actually by the Russians. There are more advanced systems. There's the S-300 and the S-400 being the latest version of that, which is way more sophisticated. Of course, the Russians are not going to give their best shit to the Syrians. So what happened is that the Israelis have been doing these missile strafes, and they've been doing these missile strafes into Syria now for close to a year. So, and it's never talked about, because what they'll do is they'll get right up to the Syrian border, and then they'll fire their missiles, you know, from Israeli or sort of, you know, this kind of strange neutral airspace. And that way they're not violating any kind of, you know, sort of border etiquette or whatever that means. So what happened was that that they theoretically planned a sortie, meaning the Israeli jets, which I believe are F-15s, they're American jet fighters. They were flying at a certain altitude, and they were flying beneath this Russian sort of bomber intelligence gatherer. And because the S-200 has kind of this fail-safe in it where it goes after the aircraft that's at the highest altitude, that's what it went after. So instead of going after the Israeli fighters, it went after it. It hit that bomber intelligence gatherer. And then as a result of this, now Putin has done nothing. And he's actually starting to experience some heat in Russia because he hasn't done anything, he hasn't retaliated, but he's really tight with Bibi Netanyahu. And I think the Russians are way more in bed with Israel and
well, that would be Israel would be playing both sides.
Of course.
Right. Yeah,
of course. And, you know, and they say that they found the remains of these airmen We don't know that. I mean, it could have been, I mean, we don't. Here's
And
what I
this could
think.
all be hogwash too.
Yeah, here's what I think people should really begin to wrap their heads around is we don't know shit.
Yeah.
Okay, which is why we do these shows.
Yeah.
So that we could try to, untangle some of these things so that they make sense, or at the very least are interesting to decode.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the crazy place that we're at now is we don't really know that these things are actually happening.
That's right. That's right. And since we're on the subject, this gets into what happened at the observatory in New Mexico.
Yeah.
Originally it was stated that, there was maybe some, kooky sun stuff going on, and they shut it down because, there was stuff on the computers. They'd seen things. There was a simultaneously shutdown of 6 different webcams from observatories, from Hawaii to Australia. And then it comes out that now it has to do with like pedophilia. And I thought to myself, well, this is bizarre because, who's bringing the pedophilia charge? Well, it's the FBI. And do you really trust the FBI? Right? No. Do you really trust that all of a sudden now they're going to get hip to pedophilia? So the story is that there's a janitor there, and he used the Wi-Fi to get online and to download all kinds of like child porn. I'm not entirely sure about that.
This is so interesting. So you know what else happened yesterday? And I don't pay attention to it, but it just came up in my feed, of course, with Jordan Sather saying that yesterday QAnon made some post confirming that there's secret space program. Right. And so the observatory gets shut down. I think you even made the comment that, or you were reading an article where they were talking about like, oh, they have to shut down the observatory because they don't want people to see what's really up there. Then QAnon comes and says, oh, secret space program. At the same time, all this talk about this is going on. And then this pedophilia thing. And one of the things I've been saying for a really long time is that there is this really like funky, in some ways hard to explain connection between pedophilia and the secret space program. In that one of the things that I identified sort of early on in my deprogramming is that those two were linked in a way that as soon as I started to deal with and have some understanding and realizations about some of the sexual abuse that occurred for me when I was younger, right? There started to be people showing up trying to say that trying to really sell me on that I had been part of the secret space program and all this kind of stuff, right? Like I've always felt like some of these secret space memories are screen memories for sexual abuse, right? These things are inextricably linked in a way that is hard to explain, but they go together. I mean, think about it. Even when people talk about like having been abducted by an alien, you often hear them talking about anal probing, right? Yeah. Wouldn't that be something your mind would do if you can't accept that it's someone you know doing that to you, that it projects an other onto that?
Yeah, that's true. And it would be an absolutely, kind of brilliant cover.
Totally.
For something like that. Yeah. I mean, I've heard like, others kinds of sort of mixed memory, false memory montage stuff where, people have witnessed like Bush or somebody like that turn into an alien. And really what was going on is that they were using some kind of a screen projection to get people to think that that's what was really happening. When in actuality, they were just, taking their liberties with them.
Yep.
And traumatizing them at the same time. So, I mean, I think that there could be something to that. Who's the guy, the dentist, Andrew Basaggio?
He's not a dentist. He's a lawyer, and he's the one. Yeah,
I got him confused with this other guy. The time traveling dentist. Anyway, so Basaggio talks a lot about being in that secret space program as a kid. Right.
He calls it something different, but yes.
But that's his thing, right? He talks about it.
He calls it Project Pegasus and something else. He talks about going to Mars, and he talks about time travel.
Yeah. And I'm not here to dispel Basaggio. I mean, there might be some real truth to that. But from what I've seen and how he actually interacts and communicates, I mean, he's like scrambled most of the time.
Agreed.
So, I mean, I think that there is whatever happened with him, whether it was the fact that he was taken to another planet or time space, or he was traumatized. clearly, I think it's had an effect on him because he's very difficult to follow and listen to.
I agree. My sense about him, and he's from the same town that I'm from. We went to the same high school, and we have some crossover in some of our experiences. My feeling about him has always been that he is telling the truth as he understands it. He's just misunderstanding a mind control experience for a space and time travel experience.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting kind of piece now that they're attributing the shutdown to a guy that had pedophilia. So what they did apparently.
And it's a janitor, right? It's never the high up who's doing the pedophilia. It's the janitor.
Right. So they went to the janitor's place and they got suitcases and all this other, but did they really have to shut everything down? And by the way, let's look at this from like a really kind of lucid perspective. If these observatories generally have fairly high security systems associated with them. So if somebody's getting online and using their Wi-Fi consistently, that's easy to spot. Okay, it's easy to spot internally if they're connected to the NSA or they're connected to the CIA or whomever, right? Most probably the NSA. That they would be, it would be part of a grid where things are being observed, and if there's any untoward activity, they're going to let people know about it. And very early on, if he's going to these weird websites, which are easy to trace, all they have to do is disable the DNSs, and he can't go there anymore. And they could have nipped this in the bud, 2-3 weeks ago, okay? Yeah. So here's what I think. I think that the janitor was a spy.
Okay.
That's what I think. I think the janitor was an agent. I don't know who he was working for. I don't believe he's got child porn on those computers or on the suitcases. I think the FBI is lying through their teeth because that's what they do.
Yep.
They wouldn't tell us that. I think that, and the janitor wasn't just any janitor, because if you're going to go in and you're going to get in on either their Wi-Fi or get in on their mainframe, you got to know what the fuck you're doing. So I'm assuming that this janitor was a significant hacker and was getting raw data feeds and has a bunch of stuff that they've been compiling and either willing to sell to other governments or other groups. And I think that's what happened. I think what they did is they found a high-level mole that had gotten in there and was capturing and getting ready to disperse their whatever data.
And they had to shut everything down to try and do as quick cleanup and recapture as much stuff as they could and see what else is out there that he didn't get. Very good, Robert. Yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the pedophilia thing is just, I think it's a ruse.
Yeah.
And I think you're dealing with an actual high-level operative that got in there.
Very interesting. Wow. Yeah. Okay, that was quite a little side trail on the rabbit hole. We just
had no idea we were going there.
Me either, but that's the beauty of this. So
I know, yeah. So let's get into this this Dianne Feinstein stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to bring up one thing, which is sort of this interesting backstory that's connected to Dianne Feinstein and how she became the mayor of San Francisco.
Let's hear it.
And she became the mayor of San Francisco because Dan White, who was at one point in time a police officer, he had been in Vietnam. He was a sergeant in Vietnam, came back. He was a police officer. He got kicked out of the SFPD because he reported a cop beating up a suspect, and it was like he ratted on one of his fellow cops, so they said, you can't be here. So he left and he got a job with the fire department, and he became a hero. And because he saved somebody, he saved a mother and a daughter at a building. So they called him the White Knight, right? That was his last name, the White Knight. And he got this kind of heroic sort of buzz and vibe, and people latched onto him, and he became a supervisor in San Francisco during the 1970s. So the supervisors didn't make a whole lot of money, and he was complaining about it. He tried to open a potato skin restaurant or stand on Pier 39, didn't work out. So eventually he gets so frustrated that he's not making enough money that he gives his resignation to the mayor, George Moscone, who's, a complete dirtbag. And Moscone thinks about it, and all of a sudden, people like Harvey Milk and Willie Brown and Dianne Feinstein tell him it's not a good idea. Don't do it. Don't give him his job back. So when he hears this, Dan White hears this, he gets pissed off, and he decides that he's going to go in and he's going to kill George Moscone and kill Harvey Milk. He was going to kill everybody. And in order to do that, he went through a very elaborate plan, because you couldn't take a gun through the metal detector at City Hall in San Francisco. So he found a window down in the basement to a bathroom, and he was able to somehow jerry-rig that window. Again, I don't know how big the window was. Dan White was not a small guy. So he had to get through that window. Once he got through that window with his gun intact, he went in and he killed Moscone. He killed Milk, and he was on his way to killing a couple others, but he turned himself in, which was quite odd in some ways, but not inconsistent with his character. So what happened after that is there was...
But he didn't kill Dianne Feinstein.
No, and she becomes mayor of San Francisco.
Interesting.
After this. Now, what's really interesting is that this happens during a time where San Francisco is plunged into social turmoil, because not only does Dan White kill Moscone and Milk, of course, the beloved mayor of Castro Street, but also Dan White basically gets off with a very, very light sentence. And he gets off using what's called the Twinkie defense, and that he ate too many Twinkies. And the chemicals in the Twinkies impaired his judgment. I kid you not.
Well, I do. You know me, I'm a sugar is programmable matter. So to me, that actually sounds reasonable.
Right? So right after that, not long after that, the whole Jonestown thing happens. And there's all these connections with Jonestown and San Francisco. Jim Jones at the Temple.
Yeah.
The Temple, beautiful, San Francisco. There's Leo Ryan, who represents the San Mateo County, San Francisco, part of San Francisco. So there's all these San Francisco roots. People are from San Francisco that are part of Jonestown. And guess what they did? They would have these drills in Jonestown. They were trauma drills.
Of course they were.
Yeah. So they planned for an event like when Leo Ryan went down to Guyana and basically, took a bird's eye view of what was happening there. And Jim Jones drilled people into committing mass suicide.
Right.
So it wasn't like it was their first dance when he was. They had actually practiced this.
And didn't they drink Kool-Aid in Jonestown?
Yeah, that's
more sugar is programmable.
But it was Kool-Aid at least with arsenic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they had a name for these operations, for these drills, and the name for the drill was Operation White Knight.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Which is what Dan White was called, the White Knight. So there's all this weird programming around White and Jonestown and Jim Jones, and then ultimately Dianne Feinstein, who comes to power as a result of that. And she sees, it was like, she wasn't just elected. Like if you were there in the Bay Area and were witnessing this, she seized power. She was like she was like a Caesar. That's what she did. The city almost bent to her will in some ways, because they were looking for somebody who was strong and maternal, right? So she came in, she had that maternal vibe, she brought that strength thing, and then she was mayor for a very long time. That led her and catapulted her into being a senator, and a lifetime of corruption and crime.
Beyond belief.
Yeah, yeah. So we had a bunch of...
Wasn't there a movie called White Knights too with Mikhail Baryshnikov and Gregory Hines?
Yeah, it's Mikhail Baryshnikov, Gregory Hines, and Isabella Rossellini.
Yeah. Okay, so go on. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about was all these bullet points of corruption that I went over them on my show. We can go over them today if you want. But you also had some interesting stuff to bring in from the gymnastics side.
Well, my question is this, is that like, well, aside from the fact that she's 85 years old and still doing this and doesn't show any signs of, you know, looking to
Slowing
retire,
down? Yes.
right? Why is she somehow the point person on all these cases that are somehow tied to some kind of sexual abuse, right? So like with the gymnastics, like she was heading up a bill, and so all the gymnasts and all the, you know, whatever were kind of, you know, supporting her and going to her and trusting her, because she was basically pushing a bill that said you have to report sexual abuse, which is a no-brainer. Like, this is not some, you know, but she had, this weird thing where she has the trust of all these people. And some of these people who've trusted her and worked with her are not stupid people. And I don't, you know, and should take a look at this and see like, what this is like Fox Henhouse shit, right? And then this one pops up with that is again, you know, her as the middleman pinpoint person, you know, on this situation that involves some sort of molestation of an underage person. And what's going to happen based on that now in the Senate, which was the same, you know, which is what she was doing with the gymnastics thing too. How does she, like, why is she the point person for all of this? Why is she sort of this gatekeeper as to how this will move from like the social sphere? And also, mind you, both of these things have now become attached to the Me Too movement, right? This is all Me Too kind of stuff. And like, what is this? Like, why, you know, I mean, I understand that people are asleep and under mind control and whatever. And there is also something to the point of, you know, with the gymnasts where it's like, okay, well, whatever her past was, she's pushing this thing that's important to us, so let's stand behind her. But nobody ever stops to ask, well, why is she doing that? Is she this person who sits there to try and gain the trust of people so she gets all of these stories, because she's really there to control who knows what about what, because there's, you know, something running in the background that people are not aware of. Mm-hmm. And she's there to sort of collect information on it from all sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, why don't we look at her chart? That might give us an interesting insight. And I got a couple of charts for her that I kind of wanted to go over, not get, where are we? Let's do this. Not get too into the weeds with it, but.
Yes, 30 minutes is long out the window, guys. At least for this episode. Robert is an expert in time dilation, so.
That's me, the time adjuster. So this is a really interesting chart in a lot of ways. Now, it doesn't really reflect the chart of what we would call like a well-known public servant, somebody that's really out there in the public eye. I mean, everything you can see, everything is below the horizon.
Yeah.
So the only thing that she has above the horizon is Saturn in Aquarius, which I'll get to in the subsequent chart. And that's over in the 11th house, which is...
So if you think of the horizon as where you can see, and below right? So like everything with her is hidden, and there's only a small amount of truth that's exposed. And of course, that's related to Saturn.
Well, so
is that what that means?
The below the horizon is indicative of things that are more personal in the chart.
Okay.
Like the fourth house means you're engaged in your family, your roots, life that's close to home. Fifth house, children, pleasure. These are all more personal kinds of stages of development and access. When you go above the horizon, you're moving out of that realm and into the upper part of the chart, which tends to be more about the world and more transpersonal. So she doesn't, what's interesting about her is that she has a very, very different chart between San Francisco and Washington, D.C., which I'll talk about.
Okay.
So she has all these planets below the horizon, and she's got this anaretic degree of 29 Pisces, which is a very interesting degree. The 29th degree of Pisces is the same degree that's shared by Harvey Weinstein and Barron Trump. They're both 29 degrees Pisces.
Interesting. And you think of Weinstein, doesn't sound that different than Feinstein. Barron Trump, you think about an oil baron, and she's the clean energy baron. This is very fascinating.
Well, yes, absolutely. And so I would say when you look at Feinstein, she looks like a very old, creaky old soul, right? Even when you go back and look at pictures of her when she was young, she looks old. There's nothing remotely sparkly or new or fresh about her.
Not
She
at all.
just, so this is somebody based on that 29th degree. That is the last degree of the zodiac, by the way. And this is the ascendant. So this is how she kind of appears to the world. She's cronish in her, kind of evolutionary development now, but she's always kind of been that way. She's always, and you said that she's got this kind of like, Wicked Witch of the West kind of vibe. And and I think this is her 29 degree Pisces ascendant. Now, the other thing that's really interesting about her is that she is vehemently anti-gun, but she also has Aries in the first house. And there are pictures of her with AR-15s, and there's a part of her where I think she's got gun lust. I think
if you've been engaged in all the corruption she's been engaged in, I'd be afraid of the people having guns too.
Yeah,
but I'd make sure I had one.
Yeah, but here's where I think the answer to your question, like, why is she this point person? Well, if you go down to the bottom of her chart, her sun is at Cancer, 0 Cancer, and Cancer is the sign of the mother. So she's got this mother thing going on, and it's right there at the bottom of her chart, which is absolutely conjunct the IC. So she's got her sun in the 4th house, that's Cancer's house, and at 0 degrees Cancer. So she's like this, she's like the mother to the gymnastic girls, right? That's in her chart. And what's also interesting, she has this trine, it's exact from her sun to the true node, which is in the sign of Pisces. And that's in the 12th house, and it's hidden and it's tucked away. And Pisces can represent a lot of different sort of flavors and vibrations. And, Pisces can be really profoundly spiritual, but it can also be very, very deceptive. And it can, be involved in things like esoterica and the occult. So she has easy access. To, I believe, either occult or esoteric energies that come to her through that 12th house. I would not be surprised if, Dianne Feinstein is deeply engaged in ritual work. That's my sense.
You think she's like part of like the Temple of Set kind of thing going on over there in San Francisco?
I don't know, because there's never really been any like hardcore links. Like, whenever we think about people like that, we think about Hillary Clinton and I don't know who else falls into that bucket so neatly, but I would say that she's involved in something. She's got something going on. And it's interesting you bring up the Temple of Set, because you and I were talking about this yesterday, and how San Francisco is this hotbed for satanic activity. It has been for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. And we were talking about, whenever I go to San Francisco, as much as I enjoy the dining and some of the culture, like, I feel like I need a shower when I leave there. And I don't just mean like a bath. I mean, like, I need something to cleanse, like a spiritual shower. And it stays, it lingers, you know what I mean? Like, it lingers, and there's a darkness there that is palpable when you're there and in your body when you've gone. And it's so fascinating to me that so many people are so attracted to it. Like, I can't tell you how many people that I know that from when I've lived in various places like Austin and New York and whatever, that just cannot wait to move to San Francisco. You know what I mean? It's like a magnet. And it's so interesting.
Well, there's something really supernatural about San Francisco. And, I lived there for off and on for quite a few years, mostly off. I'd say about the total amount of time I lived in San Francisco was about for 2 years, but for the 2.5 years. But the time that I did live there, I had some of the most wild, supernatural, crazy experiences of my life. So there's a lot of interesting energy with San Francisco. And, some people believe that, it's because it's where the Pacific and the continental plates, sort of meet and divide. And there's this, major fissure
Well, the fault lines, I wonder what kind of energies are coming up, and with all the earthquakes and the shaking and whatever kind of stuff and the fires, and it is interesting.
Oh, totally. You know, and there've been some really interesting work done on like places like Mount Diablo, and Mount Hamilton and San Jose. Yeah, and the one in Marin County, Mount Tamalpais. So these three mountains apparently were like these dome caps that came in, and they're part of like a really interesting ley line network that runs through the Bay Area. So there's a lot of interesting spiritual and multidimensional energy there. And, you know, if you wanted to get involved in some kind of occult or esoteric practice, I mean, you know, clearly that would be a place to be because, you know, I think the veil is pretty thin in San Francisco. So you've got people like Michael Aquino and Anton LaVey, you know, all hanging out there. And they're, you know, they're tip of the iceberg people. They're the ones that we know about. And there's other people.
Right. Yeah. They're the public relations at time.
Right. And just outside of San Francisco, you know, you have the Bohemian Grove, which is
Petaluma and all that area up there is so weird. Yeah.
Right. So it's
all
all,
class,
you know,
which we've talked about before.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
So the area itself, I think, has it hardwired into it.
In Petaluma is where the Noetic, the what's the place called?
Yeah, IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences.
I've been there. A very strange place. And so this is a place where they really worked on psi abilities and remote viewing and all that kind of stuff. So I would imagine that part of the reason that place was chosen is because the veil is thin there and it's easy, you know, like that's a place where that energy is loosened up and you can really work with it.
Maybe. I was there too. I did a tour there and I did a couple of pieces on some people that worked there. Did you do the staring exercise?
No, I went there Kara had a workshop there. And so I went there for Kara's workshop, but it was a very interesting place. And it was like really hidden and hard to find.
Yeah.
And just, it was super, the energy there was interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't get to sort of dig in and do whatever most people do when they go there, because I was there for a very specific purpose. But I did notice that there was some interesting.
Yeah. So, and by the way, the most powerful psychics and mediums I ever ran across were in the Bay Area. That was, you know, and I've been all over the place. So there's something to that. One of the things that you and I were talking about with Feinstein, and this is something that I covered on my show, was this whole thing that was connected to what's now the Tesla plant. Which is in the South Bay. It's in Fremont, which is actually part of Alameda County. And Feinstein got involved with this clean tech thing. And clean tech started off as like a hedge fund in Silicon Valley, where they were basically promoting all these clean technologies that were going to supplant like coal and oil and petroleum and all that stuff. So what happened is that they got caught up in a bunch of corruption.
Yeah.
And the corruption was specifically with Solyndra. And Solyndra was a business that was creating these glass tubes that you put inside of these solar panels. And what they didn't realize is when they started the business, or they probably did, is that the Chinese were going to undercut them. Their business was going to be a failure.
Right.
So they lost a shitload of money. And this was a company.
They didn't realize it, or they knew that, and that was also part of the plan.
That's right. That's right. So that money was taxpayer money.
Yeah.
And they were talking like trillions of dollars.
Is that part of the technology transfer? Like that's what's always happening, is that these corrupt people are always transferring technology, backdoor shit to fucking China. Bill Clinton was
absolutely
involved in that. That's always part of this shit.
It was I think billions of dollars that they lost through Solyndra.
Yeah.
So don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but what happened with Feinstein is she's been in charge of that facility through her husband's real estate investment company for years. So whether it was the NUMMI plant, because it started off as a GM plant, and then it became a NUMMI plant, NUMMI being the combination of GM and Toyota, and then it became Solyndra, and now it's Tesla.
Right.
And not only do they have the land and the building, but they're also in charge of the staffing of Tesla. Like when you drill down and look at what Dianne Feinstein is in conjunction with her husband, Richard Bloom. She's a crime boss.
Yeah.
It's exactly what she is. She is a freaking crime boss.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, I didn't know about the staffing thing, but it is so interesting, the amount of weird stuff and deception and corruption around all of those things. And what is the importance of this one particular site, right? Why does, from what I understand from some of the things you've shared with me and some other research, that Tesla was basically kind of forced into this. Like, it was like really made very clear and that it was very important that it be there. Why? What's going on there? What is that building an edifice for? What's underneath the ground there? What is that building made of? Is there surveillance going on there? Is there blackmail going on there? Is there a base underneath there?
It's a really, really interesting point. And, this is what I love about you, because you bring in stuff like this. It's like, let me think about that. And if you look at the Bay Area is a hotbed of militarized intelligence, university intelligence, think tanks. So if you go into the Berkeley Hills, you have DARPA right there in the Berkeley Hills. If you go across the bay, you have Stanford, and you have the Livermore Labs and the Linear Accelerator. You've got SRI. You've got Moffett Field, which is an old military base. You got the Presidio.
It's all,
And now we have this talk about this plant. This NUMMI / Solyndra / Tesla plant. And you're right. Absolutely. Lockheed is in the Bay Area. I mean, who knows really what's kind of going on beneath everything. Now, you get to a certain part of the Bay Area and it becomes very difficult to do stuff underground, because there's a lot of the Bay Area that's built on landfill. So if you go any further, I think, south of that NUMMI plant, you're running into Alviso and Milpitas, which are, they're not very solid in terms of their land mass. So that might be sort of the kind of the end point if they're doing
the boundary of whatever the underground complex is there.
Right. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Now this is a weird synchronicity, and you and we talked about this before. So I decided to go in and try to find some of the back history, like when that building was actually, built, or if there's any kind of, dirt around it. And I'm just going to do a quick screen share with people so they can see this. Jasper, let me do it.
Jasper's insisted on being the star of the show today. He's gone for a whole ton of screen time.
Yeah, Jasper is
his tail, his head, everything.
He's being a little obstreperous, I think the word is. All right, let me see if I can find the quickly this. Here we go. Let's do this. Let's grab this. We don't want the corruption piece. We don't want that. Hold on. 9 times out of 10, I get this thing to just pop. Let's try this. I don't think this is it. I think this is the Feinstein corruption. Let me see if I can move it in here. Hold on one second. Maybe that'll help. No. Okay, for some reason it's not popping, but let me just read this. So I found this newspaper called the Argus, and it's still around. Anyway, they talk about breaking ground on the General Motors plant in Fremont. And I looked at it and I'm like, wow, this is really interesting, because the day that they broke ground on this plant in Fremont is on September 20th, 1961. And here we are on September 20th, just happening to talk about this thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's some kind of synchronicity or clue, but I found it to be very unusual that
to me, this is simulation stuff, right? Like, this is, to me, this is the kind of evidence that we're in some kind of coded simulation here, Very interesting. Go on.
No, I don't really have much more to add about that, except that, that it's unusual. And,
but also what happened, what I think this is interesting considering what our last episode was about. What else happened on 9/20/1963?
Well, that's a really good point, which thank you for jogging my memory. So this is in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
On September 20th, there were two significant events that took place. One was when Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs in the much ballyhooed and hyped Battle of the Sexes, which a number of people think that Bobby Riggs threw for a significant amount of money, which could be the case. That day, earlier that day in Natchitoches, Louisiana, there was a plane crash, and on that plane was the singer, the very popular singer at that time, Jim Croce. So we have this very strange sequence of events where there's this very charged kind of moment in time. This is the tide is turning between the sexes. Billie Jean King from San Francisco, by the way. And the tide is turning. Wow. I mean, this was a big hyped event. I mean, this is with Wide World of Sports, Howard Cosell, right?
Yeah.
And this
the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, this is the era of the spectacle. It's Muhammad Ali. It's Evel Knievel. And now we've got Billie Jean versus Bobby.
Yep.
And that morning, people's hearts are crushed, broken, because Jim Croce will no longer.
So there's a sacrifice. There's a changing of some kind of guard or some kind of switching of, Billie Jean King is the woman beating the man, but she's also a woman with a man's name, right?
Right.
And then our last episode was around this Serena Williams thing. Of course, Billie Jean King is constantly inserting herself in all of these controversies surrounding racism, sexism, Serena Williams, all this kind of stuff. What is this? What is this?
There's some deep entanglement here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then don't forget Michael Jackson's big hit is Billie Jean.
Oh. Yep. And wow. And there's questions around him about whether he's black or white and whether he's male or female and
human or alien.
Yeah. Oh man. and right. And people are asking those same questions about Elon Musk, whose Tesla plant is there. Is he human or alien?
Yep.
Right. We are getting to some really core questions about, and this is just this a symbolic representation of it. Some really, really core questions about what this is, who are we, who is everyone else, what is going on, what things are connected to what actually makes stuff happen in the world, what is the energy behind it, what is the energy behind clean energy? Is it sexual trauma? Is that why Dianne Feinstein collects these things? That she had somehow what do you call it when something takes one energy for one thing and changes it into an energy some kind for another thing, right? Is she like a
succubus just sucks energy,
right? But she's
Well, she would be like a transmutator, right?
Yeah.
Or transistor. I mean, possibly.
She's not doing very well with the clean energy thing, but it is interesting that it does seem like the people who care about clean energy don't seem to care that much. Well, they care about Me Too kind of sexual trauma and pedophilia or whatever and stuff, but they don't really care about pedophilia. I'm not clear on what this is, but there is a knot here. You know what I mean? And we're pulling at the strings of it, and it'll be very fascinating to see how we can unwind or unravel some of this in the weeks to come.
I think something's going to come out with Feinstein.
Yeah.
I was looking at her progress chart, and I was looking at her chart in Washington D.C., which is very different than her San Francisco chart. Yeah. But I think something's going to come out around her, and in the not too distant future, she's getting into territory now where I think certain people are starting to pay attention. And there are people that are, research oriented, and people that are looking at this and going, what's going on with this person? Why is she invested in this?
There are even liberals who are really questioning the timing of what she did and why she didn't do it back in July when she first found out.
Yeah, that's an issue.
Yeah. Wow.
So,
all right.
We went a little bit further today than we normally do.
And you did point out also, I thought was fascinating how you pointed out how Billie Jean and Dianne Feinstein look a lot alike.
They do.
And they both wear pearls, dude. What is it with these ladies who like are awful looking that wear a string of pearls? Like they think that's going to make it better.
Well, what do they say? Like pearls and swine or something like that?
Yeah.
What's
Yep.
casting
Pearls before swine.
Yeah.
But it's like trying to put lipstick on a pig too.
Lipstick on a pig. There we go. Yeah. What do you think, right. Jasper? What do you think? Jasper's beyond all of this.
Jasper's suddenly silent.
He's beyond all this stuff. He keeps looking at the green light, though. The green camera light. Like he knows what's going on.
Of course he does. He knows that this is, he'll know when we're off air and he'll, go back and do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, Emily, this is a great episode. And
yeah, I think we had a successful second date.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we can do it again. We can hook up again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, guys, you can catch Robert at robertphoenix.com. Get yourself a reading. You can find me at offplanetradio.com. And if you're interested in getting your health and wellness in order, hit me up on Facebook at Emily Moyer, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye. All right, cool. Cool. All right.